today is gamma-aminobutyric acid, otherwise called as GABA. So let's call it that because that's a mouthful. So GABA, why does it matter so much? GABA is a big one. It's a neurotransmitter, right? And it comes from glutamine. It is called a neuroinhibitor, whereas glutamate is a neuroexcitator. So that means that GABA is the brakes, right? Glutamate is the accelerator and GABA is the brakes. So how is GABA created? First, right? So what happened, and this is very important, is whenever you have an excess of glutamate, that excess is supposed to be turned into GABA. And it does that through the action of something called glutamic acid decarboxylase, GAD. It's an enzyme that takes glutamate and turns it into GABA. So that means that GABA is not produced by itself. It needs to be built from glutamate, and more importantly, it is built by the excess of glutamate. There's actually a ratio, 1:1, where glutamate gets to a certain level, and past that, 1 molecule of glutamate will be 1 molecule of GABA. That's very important because that means that the point is not to lower the glutamate. The point is to have the surplus of glutamate, is to be able to transform it into GABA. For that, again, you need that enzyme, like the GAD I was talking about, matters a lot because it seems like a lot of the issues that are related with the incorrect ratio glutamate to GABA, so in the sense of this too much glutamate. Too much glutamate means that you're just not turning it into GABA. That's what the issue is. So you don't have too much glutamate. It's an art. You just don't have enough GABA because you're not translating one into the other. Comes from an issue with that enzyme. That seems to be the major issue. Whenever you talk about enzyme, you talk about epigenetics. If you talk about epigenetics, you talk about intent, information, right? So understand that the point is not going to be it's not going to be about lowering your glutamate level. It's not going to be about ingesting GABA as a supplement. It's going to be changing what is wrong in the system that does not allow you to produce GABA as required. That's really what matters. This is epigenetic based, right? So GABA as a brake. What does that mean, a brake exactly? Because too many times people will understand an inhibitor as a calming agent. That's not what this means for the nervous system. So remember, it's a neurotransmitter, right? So that's not what it means for the nervous system. What does that mean exactly, an inhibitor? If we look at speech, right? It's a very important one. GABA is very necessary. What is it necessary for? It's necessary for the pause in between words. If this were music, I would tell you that GABA is necessary to play the silences. After all, if you look at music that is just constant sound, it doesn't make, by itself, it's not enough to make music. What you need in music, just like you need in speech, as in language, is you need silences. That's what allows you to have a time between words that allow you to build sentences. Intonation, the tone that I use to convey something, is based also on those silences, right? The accentuation of a sound versus lowering. Anytime you have a space, an absence of something, that's where the inhibitor comes in, right? So it's important to be able to produce the sound, but it's just as important to be able to have a silence. Otherwise, you have a sentence that just comes one after the other, which makes it very, very hard to understand. That's how our language is built, right? So whenever you see people with slurred speech, with that speak too fast, that just mumble, that put everything together, what you see is an issue with the ratio of ration. Man, I put it in French, like I've been speaking French too much lately. I'm supposed to put a ratio here. You see, so that slur speech put together, you see an issue with the glutamate to GABA ratio, right? That's not the only problem, obviously, but we see it in that ratio every time. I like to go to measure things at things like lactate or that, but also the neurotransmitter, because that gives us a good idea about the state of the system. So GABA is very important for the thing. Like, for example, it's a major player when it comes to contraction of the bowels. We have a lot of GABA receptors lining up on this part around the stomach, right? It's a huge part of the enteric nervous system, GABA is, and it plays a big factor in the contraction of the bowel. So that means that if you have a problem with GABA creation, right, through again that enzyme GHD, you will have problem with constipation and things like this. But even if we took this a little bit further, if you remember the emotional mapping and we talk about the 4-pack and how tight it can be, how it relates to anxiety and things like this, and you would see that GABA has a part to play in this as well. Low GABA means tightness in the stomach. So I'm not saying that in order for you to go get GABA as a supplement. I am using this as a measurement, not as a target, right? If you take it as a target, let's go get GABA supplement. No, it's a measurement. That means that when your stomach is tight right here, right? When you have a problem with your speech, like you're speaking too fast, it just means that the brakes are breaking, are not on. And that should be, that's a telltale sign that you should look for. Tightness in your 4-pack means you are too much in an excitatory mode. You need to reduce the thing. You need to put the brakes on. So obviously you could look at exterior factors, coffee, sugar, stuff like that, like might be an issue there, and also your own behavior. What it means is you need to be able to put the brakes on. And you have other factors that matter a lot like this. When you have GABA levels that are so low, we'll see muscle spasms. That makes sense because, and you see that on cramping a lot. That goes with the 4-pack. So your 4-pack is cramping. It's tightness of the stomach followed by muscle contraction that goes too far. Why does it go too far? Because you don't have the brakes on, right? So whatever you see muscle spasm, which is, remember, external torque, muscles, is muscle spasm, your lower back always spasming, so that pain in your lower back, that spasm in that lumbar erectors that we talk about, external torque and everything, comes from that issue of ratio excitatory to inhibitory. You just too much on. That's what leads to your lower back going like this. Eye focusing, if it's a problem with GABA. That means you went too far into the excitatory mode. Same thing with chronic pain. Chronic pain, why? Because pain is a function of the body to indicate something is going the wrong way. It's an excitatory factor, right? So that means that if we go too far toward that excitatory factor and cannot put the brakes on, we will have pain that does not necessarily has a real cause. That's a podcast in itself, by the way, because there's a major rabbit hole there. But most of the time, pain, in the case of chronic pain, is you feel pain when there is no damage. That is not normal. There's a fault in the system, right? And the fault in the system is that the brakes are not being applied to tell you that that pain is not necessary. Pain is a function of the excitatory system. So obviously, that will matter for us, right? There are ways to increase the GABA levels artificially. Sugar and carbs and alcohol and some drugs are part of that. So that would explain why you have such cravings toward all this. Like, so it's weird, right? You are very much in an excitatory state. You're always on edge or stuff like that. The first thing you're going to go toward is booze. Why? Or sugar and carbs. Same thing. Because at first, it's going to allow you to create the GABA, but artificially, in the sense of it is not a behavior change, right? So it's not through epigenetics. You're doing it through a substance. And at first, it will allow you to apply the brakes. But that is only a short-term fix, right? You're just using a substance to do that. It is artificial in its sense. Like that GABA does not come from you, it's from your own creation per se. It's an artificial way of raising it. And over time, it's actually going to lower your natural capacity to produce GABA, which makes things worse, which of course only increases the craving for the alcohol, the sugar, the carbs, or the drug, which of course is the system of addiction. And that's why you need more and more and more of it if you have relied on those as a fix to calm your excitatory system, which is why we see alcohol, which is a driver toward the sympathetic side. Weird, right? Just like sugar and carbs are, that can actually be used to calm yourself down. Actually, they're not calming yourself down. All they're doing is they're applying the brakes. And that can make you feel at that moment much calmer, therefore good. Therefore, you start to get the major cravings whenever you get too excited. But those are only agents of the sympathetic nervous system, which is toward the excitatory system. So this will only drive you further in the excitatory system, which will only drive you toward the need of those more and more and more. And again, we see that addiction pattern, unfortunately, that we encounter too often. So even that addiction pattern is a pattern of inhibitory versus excitatory. That is the key to everything. GABA is also responsible for alpha wave production, but I'll make another podcast in this because then we get into very, very specific ideas. So you can see what the importance, you can see the importance of GABA into all this as the brakes, how much we need it. But again, the important part also is to remember that it comes out of a surplus of glutamate. So you cannot just lower your glutamate, you cannot just up your GABA. It's an entire part of the system that has to function properly. If you take GABA supplements, you will find very nastily that it won't work that well because over time, because what will happen is the GABA will be transformed back into glutamine, that will be transformed into glutamate, that will spike your excitatory system, and we are back to square one, right? The only way this is going to work is if you have a system capable of turning the glutamate into GABA, and even if too much GABA is being produced, then it will be turned back into glutamate through glutamine. So the key is always the same, it's behavioral, and we have to make sure the system works correctly. But that ratio, glutamate to GABA, has been seen in something like fibromyalgia, right? Has been seen in things like anxiety, like a number of factors that interest us. It's a very important ratio. Cool? Thank you, guys.